The engines were beginning to relax at the sheds after a hard day's work, but not all of them were able to rest. Arthur was being prepared for the sleeper train to Crewe. As the shed staff attended to Arthur, Jimmy bustled in. "You know, it's been a year since the Duchess left to live in Crewe," announced Jimmy. "Really?" exclaimed Fred, astonished. "It only seems like yesterday." "How time flies, eh?" sighed Ivett. Everyone agreed. "Oh, I do miss her," added Jimmy. "Well, she always asks how you all are whenever I see her," smiled Arthur, "and she misses you dearly too." Jimmy, Ivett, and Fred all beamed brightly. "You know who the Duchess is?" asked Ivett. "Indeed, I've known her for quite a while," explained Arthur. "Oh, do tell us," whistled the engines together. Babs interrupted. "But he hasn't told us how he became known as Arthur." Arthur smiled at his friends and continued the rest of his story. In the early 50s I was assigned to be reallocated to Crewe, so before I left I was to be painted in the new British Railways livery. It was a lovely choice of Brunswick green, and I was also fitted with smoke deflectors. Unfortunately, my tender had been damaged whilst being shunted into the workshop, so I was given a black fives tender instead. I did look rather odd, and again the other engines thought it a great joke. But one engine in particular didn't, and she convinced me that I looked far more splendid than anyone else. Her name was the Duchess. As you know, she had a heart of gold, and was breathtaking in her beautiful blue livery. She was a nurturing and forgiving soul. All the engines would bask in her loving glow. "How do you do? I'm the Duchess. And you are?" she smiled. "I used to be called Ostrich, but now I'm the Honourable Artillery Company," I explained. The Duchess's smile grew broader. "As impressive as your name is, we need to find a suitably short nickname for you." Oh, I had to agree. My name was far too long, and the shed master and crews were beginning to call me that engine out of bad habit. When I was transferred to Crewe, I pulled the expresses to Scotland, but occasionally I would take a train down to Euston, and I would always be greeted warmly by the Duchess. I would always ask about the shed master and how Arthur was getting on in the Duke of Wellington's regiment. It was the year of Her Majesty's coronation, and everyone was looking forward to the celebrations ahead. All seemed fine, until one morning in late May. I had just arrived with the Irish mail when the shed master came to see me at the station. He seemed sad and anxious. Little did I know that the Duke of Wellington's regiment was deployed to Korea 2 years after the Korean War had broken out. They were part of the 1st Commonwealth Division. They had been hit hard, but had held their ground. Unfortunately, they had lost a number of men. Arthur had been one of them. I don't remember why, or the reasons for it, but I was tremendously angry, filled with resentment and despair. Arthur had promised to return to see me, and I felt he had gone back on his promise. I stayed at the sheds for several days, and I'm sorry to say I was a rather vulgar engine. I refused to steam properly, burn coal, or even turn a wheel. I was so angry, no one came near me. The shed master became concerned, and tried everything to get me moving again, but it didn't work. He even promised to repaint my tender, but still I did nothing. I would glare furiously at the crews. They had all made empty promises, and I felt they were all liars, and that Arthur was one of them. But a saint in blue came to rescue me. The Duchess took it upon herself to take action, and I'll always be in debt to her for her wise and kind words. It's natural to mourn the loss of someone in different ways, but you are going the wrong way about it, she advised firmly. Arthur treated you like one of his own. One could be forgiven for seeing that he loved you like a family member. You should always be reminded of the happy and gracious times, never the ugliness of the past. You must help Arthur's memory live on. I'm sure he wouldn't approve of you sulking in the sheds. After all, in his eyes, you were a proper engine. I realized what a fool I had been, and thought long and hard about what the Duchess had said. As she steamed away to collect her train at the station, I apologized to the crews and convinced them I was fit enough to pull a train. The Duchess was most pleased when I backed down next to her. Over the coming weeks, the Duchess would spur me on to make Arthur proud. My trains were always on time, and I could give any Pacific a run for their money and performance. Arthur would be very proud, the Duchess would always say, and in some way I felt she was right. The last time I saw the Duchess was at Euston, when I was in charge of the midday Scot. The Duchess was so impressed at the change I had made, she turned to me and smiled at my nameplate. "Remember when I said you needed a shorter name?" she asked. I remembered clearly, but no suitable name had occurred in my thoughts. "How about Arthur?" she said proudly. "I'm sure he would be immensely honoured for you to carry his name in remembrance." I couldn't have been happier. Arthur seemed fitting, and I have been known as Arthur ever since. The engine smiled happily at Arthur. "What a beautiful story," said Babs, trying to hold back her tears. "So the Duchess named you after your driver!" exclaimed Jimmy. The engines were blown away by Arthur's tale, and spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about the Duchess and how much of an inspiration one engine could be. Arthur smiled to himself and thought about Arthur, his old driver. "Will you send our love and best wishes to the Duchess, please?" cheered Jimmy excitedly. "Of course, my dear boy. It will be my pleasure," replied Arthur. And with that, Arthur steamed silently and respectfully out of the sheds.